Okay, fantastic. Welcome to Timeless Leadership Principles. And this talk brought to you in part by Sarah Carell and the power of her story. We get together weekly, which is really a fantastic talk, a group of leaders to discuss what we have affectionately called timeless principles for leaders. And we get together and we discuss ideas. How do we make the world a better place through our leadership approach? How do we accomplish that in our companies, in our personal lives, with our families, and in our communities? And so we've had some fantastic conversations. This is a bit of a round robin. It's a very interactive type of discussion. I throw out a concept, and then as you will see if you stick around, our panel of distinguished guests really take it to a whole different level and bring the topic into where it should be logically. So I was joking. I don't know if I did, Sarah, before you hit the record button, and I said, this talk could be fantastic. It has the potential to be, although I have no empirical evidence that would point toward that reality. I don't really know how this talk is going to go because it's a little bit different talk. And if you'll bear with me, this might be a little choppy on the front end, but as I wrap it up, I think you'll understand where I'm pointing our conversation, right? I was occasionally in between my coaching appointments, if I've got 10 minutes or so, I look for some motivational videos to watch. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're very compelling, sometimes they're political. And I was listening to Ted Cruz talk about the topic of transgender as it relates to athletic competition with men versus women. And I felt like it was a very compelling conversation. And what I want to do in this talk, without making it highly charged, I wanted to see how we can explore this idea of having a conversation with others that we would maybe sharply disagree with. And I think at the point of this conversation, I do want to set up an idea where I'm not looking to create any political allegiances or alliances. I'm looking more at this conversation as an approach to having a really great conversation and even a great debate, which I do not consider myself a great debater. Ironically, when I look back on my life, it was something that I wish I would have learned. I wish I would have learned structured debate as a very young man. I think it's a fascinating skill, and I think it just can only make your life a lot better. And I think looking back, wow, there's a lot of conversations that I wish I could have had, but I was not, I was not prepared to have these conversations. And so I think at the core of this conversation, I want to, lay some ground rules out that I think as leaders, we want to improve our capacity to lead other people. We want to care for people. We want to elevate the dignity of other people. But I think also with that, we want to solve problems for what's best for an entire group and not just an individual. And I go back to the Ted Cruz conversation. And although I'm not going to deconstruct that and talk about it in terms of where I align with that, the one thing I wanted to talk about all of you with, and that's why I'm saying this could be a good conversation. I'm just trying to connect these dots. Is I want to connect the idea that in a conversation that we're clear about what the true conversation is, what the real target is in the conversation. And what I mean by that is I've gotten into conversations with people where they've gotten off of the intended target. And it reminds me of a concept or a fallacy, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this, called the straw man fallacy. And the straw man fallacy is this idea that if you and I were engaged in a conversation and I felt that you were actually maybe outclassing me or getting the better of me, I might move laterally away from the actual topic and hold another topic up for you to attack so that I wouldn't have to really deal with the real issue that you were coming at me with. And it's a technique that people use willingly and sometimes unknowingly, but it's difficult to keep people on topic on what is it exactly that we're truly talking about. And so, I think the idea of exchanging views with somebody and having a healthy conversation is so healthy. But I wanted to have a conversation with you all about how do you have conversations that stay on point? What do you do to do that without willingly attacking another person or unknowingly attacking a person? And then maybe as a parallel concept, what are your thoughts on how do companies, and maybe this is maybe a little bit of an oblique way to go into the conversation, but how does a company or an organization go into a conversation where their beliefs are under attack or their values are under attack, and yet they're being accused of attacking somebody else's values because they don't agree with those particular values? And so, again, I know that there's a little bit of vagueness in the conversation. I think you can understand why. I'm not trying to put a point on the topic, whether it would be inclusion or diversity or transgenderism. What I want to do is I want to create some ideas, a roadmap or some guardrails or understanding, which is how do all of you go into very difficult conversations and keep a difficult conversation on course. And so Paul got his hand up. We'll start off with Paul, and I know there's probably a lot of opinions and ideas on this. So Paul, kick it off.
Yeah, I wanted to share something that is an experience of mine that I probably will never forget. And that is that one evening in our home, we had a dinner. And this dinner included three people from Russia, one from Swindon, England, one from Tokyo, one from Australia. And our goal in having that conversation that night, which by the way was an 8-hour dinner, and I just wish I had recorded it, but our goal was to learn from each other and not to proselytize, not to judge or any of that. It was simply, please tell me why you believe what you believe. I want to learn.
Yeah.
And by doing that, we had a civil conversation, and you'd be amazed at the people who were there. One of them was a man who I will not name, who was the prime minister of Russia up until recently. One was the first officer in the KGB. One was a Russian mathematician. One was an RAF lieutenant. And so essentially you put your ego at the door, you sit down and you learn. And I think that's where you're trying to go. And I think that with that attitude or mindset, if you will, you can have this civil conversation and we can all learn from it. And some things that we learn we don't particularly care for, but that doesn't make the other person wrong. And the reason we know that is because we're not going to judge them.
Yeah.
And so I'll just leave that as perhaps a doormat for what you're attempting to do.
Yeah, that was very, very well said. You put my thinking in multiple directions, and so I'm trying to run after the right rabbit right now. I actually constructed an 8-point approach to having a conversation about one of what I would call a very taboo conversations that are happening politically. And again, I don't want to get this conversation embroiled in that because I don't think that's the goal of this conversation, in as much as the approach to handling different conversations. But I want to, Paul, just basically affirm you in terms of having a genuine spirit of really wanting to go there and learn from somebody. It is such a measure of self-control and wisdom. As you were saying that, I'm going to add a layer of the conversation. This is somewhat humorous, but it's very, very serious. But I'm going to introduce it in humorous ways. As a Christian and a minister, I've had conversations with people that have claimed to worship Satan, which I would put Satan worship on the other end of the spectrum of the Christian faith. And it does take a real level of self-control and courage to try to really genuinely understand how they have formulated some type of a framework and how they defend it. And how they, when you ask them simple questions about how do you define power and how do you define wickedness and those types of things. It takes a real measure to be in those conversations. And this is what I think great leaders are capable of doing, and I think this is the part that needs constant care of us, is the idea that we've got to be patient and suffer and listen and learn. And at times, even with things that we don't want to hear for a short season, so that we can do what we believe is best in the long term. And so anyway, I love what you said. And I think at the heart of this conversation is, do we have a capacity to really be curious with people that we don't fundamentally agree with? I think it's a huge hallmark, and it shouldn't threaten us. Yeah, that always used to kind of unsettle me when I remember, again, I'll use the Christian context, is when people that were Christians didn't like being questioned with the Bible open about their faith. I felt that to be a red flag. I think you should have to confirm and defend your faith, and you should understand how to do that. Otherwise, I don't think it's a true faith. Pat.
I wasn't quite ready, even though I raised my hand. You talk
You're
about
ready, Pat. You're always ready. Always.
It's just a spontaneous reaction when you're talking to raise my hand. You talk about having a differing opinion and straw, or sometimes the term people use strong man arguments. And I thought you were just talking about marriage when you said that, but I think that there are a couple of things. I think that, first of all, if you know that you're going to be having a conversation with a person who maybe doesn't have a differing opinion, but comes from a different culture set, group, background, etc. One thing I always like to do is a little bit of research before encountering them, so that I perhaps have some context about where they're coming from. So if you have that opportunity, I think it's a good thing. And you always have the opportunity after a conversation to do some of that, to put things in context. One small example, my new neighbors who moved in earlier this year are Cambodian. And though I've at work had the opportunity to work with a lot of Cambodian groups and families, I didn't know much. So I did research and learned how if they are 50 years or older, how horrific and difficult their life must have been when the Khmer Rouge came in and literally massacred virtually the entire group and society. And they started with the most prominent and educated people. First, the police officers, so that they would have no resistance, and then the doctors and educators. That context gave me a totally different perspective and willingness to learn when I went into the conversation. And it created a great conversation where they had a party for the neighborhood where all the neighbors were involved in it. But nobody else had done that. And I certainly didn't do it to feel like or appear that I knew more than I did, but it stimulated for me a lot of questions and gave me the ability to listen intently. Instead of having that superficial conversation you do when you don't know people. I think that the second thing is that if you don't have that opportunity, Paul alluded to this, but going in with a truly inquisitive mind is important. Working in peer support and counseling, often for people with very severe addictions, I often encounter people who do things, believe in things, and live lifestyles that I cannot endorse, support, or agree with. Often when you are trying to deal with very severe post-traumatic stress, you act out in different ways. And some of them may be sexual promiscuity or drinking or drug experimentation, and way beyond that. Sometimes it becomes almost predatory in nature. Yet my intent, I clearly know my intent going into those conversations, because my intent is not to convince them. Well, in the long term, I have a goal, because I am there to help them with their healing process. So I do have to convince them that some of those things are destructive. But what I have to do first is get to the core of what is happening. And I have to create an environment where they're comfortable being truthful with me with some of their darkest secrets. And that's not hard to do if you, I have my list of words here, but if you are very authentic in your approach and you show that genuine love and respect in your intent, which I think people here do very well.
Right.
Any one of these conversations, if you watch, people are leaning forward, holding space in that conversation, asking relevant questions. I think that part of it too is not speaking or expressing opinion or perhaps convincing fact until you've asked a lot of questions. And the questions should be very open-ended in the beginning. You know, tell me more about that. How did that happen? Where did that come from? And then eventually, as you start to see points, you ask very directed questions about, well, tell me about that one circumstance. And I see a correlation to something you mentioned in your childhood. Do you see that? And when you start to do that, it totally changes your ability to interact, because you may have a very strong opinion. Boy, this is wrong what they're doing. And actually, I've had very difficult ones where that person, they did things that I just cannot support. However, again, it's not my job necessarily to support the behavior. It's my job to help them see for themselves without me necessarily saying it, what they're doing. So I think I talked quite a bit, and I apologize about that, but it's essentially being a good listener and asking good questions, in my opinion. And that forms a good basis where later, if you want to, you can state facts or questions. The best would be a question where they see it for themselves. Sure. And usually what they say is, I see what you're doing. And that's good because you're accomplishing your goal. But then you can start to state facts like, well, you said this about your belief system, but actually, here is what happens with that, or something like that. So I don't know if that made sense.
Good stuff. Good stuff. If I can quickly respond to that, I know that Baya and Paul have their hands up. And Paul, if I can defer to Baya, only because she's not yet had a chance. And I also want to welcome Lydia to the conversation. Hi, Lydia. We don't know each other. Great having you. I'm going to ask you like 3 really penetrating conversations in 12 minutes. So get your pen out and be nervous, because they're going to be really hard questions. But just to respond to Pat, thank you. Your consistency, I love your consistency, and you are so methodical and easy to follow, actually. And it's true. I think to the degree that we can prepare for a conversation like that, I think of, on the extreme, I think of Sun Tzu's Art of War. Where I don't see people as an enemy, but when people have diametrically opposed views, they are in opposition to my framework, and I have an obligation to be prepared. And one way to be prepared is to try to look through their eyes, which is very difficult. Like going back to Satan worship. Okay, I'm going to try to look through their eyes, and that's a very difficult position to hold. And I'll just say this one thing before I punt, because it's timely. I was challenging myself as I put together those 8 principles for me to go into a conversation like this, if someone were to approach me. And I thought they were very intuitive. I had to force myself to look at, even when I went back to the Ted Cruz conversation, and this woman who he was opposing was making a case for athletics, kind of blurring the lines and putting transgendered people into these other categories. And then I thought about, the founding fathers, and I thought about the idea of those documents being framed on the concept of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I can see in part how sometimes, if you look at a Democratic conservative argument, that a Democrat would view a conservative as people that are constantly trying to put people in boxes and in categories, whereas liberals are trying to kind of unveil and rip those those limitations off. And if you look at it just in that one small way, there's some validity to that, but you can't stop there. You got to go the distance with the talk to get to really what is being said, to see what is truly being said. And so anyway, I'm in my kind of preparation for this call, I had to look at that as a concept and go, that's part of me understanding the person that's on the other side of the conversation, to understand this is something that they're going to bring up, and how do I actually respond to that? Not defensively, but in a way that these are my beliefs and values, and this is what I believe history has taught us. So anyway, Baya, take it away.
So I really I love this conversation, and thank you. And I have some commonality with what you were saying when you when Patrick were talking about asking inquisitive questions. I mean, a lot of what you said, guys, I really I go with and I practice. The thing that I do, because obviously I look at it from a psychological perspective, because that's my job, I always go from the perspective first that, you know, people don't care how much you know before they know how much you care. And so the listening part is essential, and is listening not in trying to find how I can oppose you, because it can be a place, let me place my conversation, let me place my opinion. It's more opening question in a way where I'm trying to find where can I build a bridge? Where is the commonality there? Where is the place where we can really reach one another as a human, and not trying to be right, not trying to win, because that's what bothers me a little bit when it comes to debate. Is a debate for me is someone trying to win a conversation, and maybe I'm not really understanding it well, but for me, that perspective is who is going to win. So when you win, you might win the conversation, but you definitely don't win the heart of the person. And so for me, that's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is reaching the heart. And for example, sometimes people come across in a way that the idea is a debate and they were trying to be right. But if you dig a little bit, they're not trying to be right. If you dig a little bit and you ask more questions, you realize they come from an environment where to exist, they had to fight. To exist, they had to try to be right. And so that's what they know. And so it's really trying to open a different conversation and a different way of interacting where they feel valued and they don't have to fight. You diffuse. I like to diffuse. I think it's and to try to understand the motives of the heart. For me, what I'm looking for is always what's the motive of the heart? Where can I help them in the heart? Because in the behavior, I can do something. But the behavior, if you're not addressing the heart, it's a little change for a little time. And so I will say, particularly in the time where we are today, I really believe that trying to build a bridge is key.
Yeah. That's so well said. And it reminds me in my coaching practice, I use a lot of tools, and specifically when it comes to conflict management or resolution, there's one tool that I used. It's called the 7 levels of discourse. And I think my memory doesn't serve me, but I think debate is like number 4 or number 5. And to your point, there is a winner and a loser in debate. I had said earlier, and I still feel this way, I truly wish I would have learned at a young age to debate, because I think what it does is it creates a framework where you intelligently go into conversations as opposed to just trying to be right. And, you know what I'm saying? I think, particularly as a young guy, I think it can get really messy for a young guy if he doesn't understand some frameworks and guideposts. But I believe the highest level of discourse is dialogue. And I believe they defined dialogue as when two people were really striving to find a better solution where both people benefited in that particular conversation. You know, and I think that's where we get the win-win terminology.
Win-win, exactly. Yeah. I was going to go there. I was going to the win-win.
Yeah,
when
it's
a win-win, the relationship wins.
Right. And I think that takes a lot of patience to get to that place. It just does. And that's one of the things I often, when I get hired to do conflict resolution, they're like, how long do you think this is going to take? And I often giggle. And I say, it's going to take as long as the two of you want it to take. But I would say that to have real lasting, transformative outcome in conflict, it's going to be a journey, because two people are going to have to really get to the bottom, and then they're going to have to build their way back up. And then it's going to be a journey. So great sharing. Paul.
Quickly, Baya and Patrick both brought this up, but the key to gaining trust of the person that you're speaking with is to establish rapport. And until you establish rapport, you haven't created the opportunity for trust. And if you don't have trust in the conversation, you're in a battle. I mean, right. Let's just face it. And I carried the notion of win-win one step further in practice. And that is a win for you, a win for me, and a win for people who are not at the table, who might be affected by our choices or our decisions. And so it's a win-win-win, as I see it.
Yeah. I want to go back to something Baya said, unless somebody wants to jump in. Lydia, were you unmuting there? Did you want to jump in? No? Whenever you're ready. No pressure. We'd love to
I'm
hear.
a talker, don't you worry.
Okay. I'm gonna mute then. You go.
No, it's all good. It's been great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, when you're ready, please jump in. I want to go back to what Baya said. You've got to establish the idea care, right? I care about you. And I've been in a lot of conversations when I really believed that I really did care about somebody that held, I'm going to use the term, a diametrically opposed view. It's just in opposition to what I believe. And I really believed in that moment that what the affection I felt was for the person. And the topic, though, it's not going to pass. It can't get past me because intellectually I can't get past it. It's not what I believe. What is your response, Baya, to people that you have established care with when they say, well, if you cared, you'd understand? Or if you cared, I think you would go a step further, but you seem stuck in your own way of thinking. How do you address that?
So I got to a situation like that many times, but I will say I'm thinking particularly about situation where I was listening to someone that really stopped me and trying to tell me, can you sign this? Can you, and I was listening, I was asking questions, and at some point I say, well, I really appreciate you sharing with me, and I really appreciate your perspective and opinion. But no, I cannot sign that because it doesn't go with my, you know what I mean? My core beliefs and really what I think is important for the future. If it was just for that type of people, I will be okay. But right now, if I sign that, I just don't give a chance to a whole other generation to ask those questions about what is okay and what is not. And I want to give that. And so that person told me, you're intolerant. And so I stopped and I say, well, I mean, we need to define here intolerance, because I don't know if you realize, but you stopped me. I listened to you for half an hour. I asked you a question to understand you better. There's no question that you ask me to know where I'm coming from and what are my perspectives. You know what I mean? So I've been really there to listen, but me having a different opinion doesn't make me intolerant. But you telling me that if I don't think the way you think, I'm intolerant, make you the person that is intolerant. And I really want you to go and look for in the dictionary, what does intolerance mean? Because intolerance is when you cannot accept the perspective of someone else, and it's your way or the highway. And so it's like, I'm totally respecting you and respecting your right to your opinion. I am totally respecting that. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I will fight for your right to express yourself, for example, because I do believe it's important that you express yourself. But so do I. I have the right to express myself, and I have the right to an opinion. So I'm not trying to fight, but I'm trying to sometimes it's become a little bit educating.
Right.
I am not going to fight the person, but I'm going to tell them, hey, let's go back to that word that you just used.
Right.
I think it's a strong word. It's a strong word that really is coming across like you have already put me in a category. You didn't even ask me a question. You didn't try to understand where I was coming from. You tried to force me to go in a certain perspective. And if I don't agree with it, and I'm like, no, that's not how conversation go. So I respect you. So I maybe I went too long, but I try to engage the person in conversation, but I will address if the person try to attack, I will address and say, no, I totally disagree with that, because you're putting a label on me, where what I did is the contrary of this label that you're putting on me.
I'm going to ask you this, but I also want to ask the entire group this, right? In the same example that you just cited, would it be inappropriate for you to say to that other person, the very thing that you're asking of me, you're taking from me? Meaning you're asking me to side with you, but that's the very thing you're taking from me, which is I have a choice to either side or not side. Is it inappropriate to reply in that way? I mean, I know that there's best practices, but I'm just saying from an intellectual, I mean, from an argumentative model, isn't that what's going on?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I could say that, but I prefer to go from an educative perspective and say, hey, I want you to go look at that for yourself. What does that mean that? But I don't want to. I mean, it's possible in certain conversation, I will do that. But I think in that perspective, I really wanted to continue to open the conversation and say, hey, what we're doing here is supposed to be a conversation. What's happening here is supposed to be us exchanging perspective. And so what I'm trying to address when I say that gently, I'm trying to say, hey, you came here with an agenda. I didn't come with an agenda. Right. I came for a conversation.
Good.
But I'm trying to do it gently.
Any other thoughts on that? I don't know if did we water down the example? Did it pass by us?
I would like to suggest that when people approach you with it's my way or the highway, that is an intention to be divisive. That is an intention to create essentially a caste system. And that eliminates equality.
Yeah.
Even though they think that what their demands are that they be equal. Well, they already are equal. Doesn't mean that everybody agrees with their opinion or their core values or any of the rest of that. And if you look at what has happened in this country over the last 30 or so years, we have managed in a rather cruel way to divide all of us into segments of population who then have rights.
Tribalism.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the Constitution, anyway.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I wanted to add something there because I think it's really very important to continue to open the conversation, because I totally agree with what Paul just said. And I will go in a place where I say, people need to feel like they have the freedom to be themselves and they have the freedom to have an opinion, because, people can express the more, things that can be really outrageous to me but when even violent sometimes. But I prefer someone expressing something violent to me than someone becoming violent. And so what I feel that is dangerous is when people feel that they cannot express themselves and say who they are, the repercussion on the society can be very dramatic in terms of violence.
Yeah, what I wanted to tease out in this too, in a specific way, was what do you say to somebody that accuses you of being intolerant and uncaring when you just don't agree with the position they hold? I have found that that's happened multiple times, to me, not in the last 24 hours, but in my lifetime. And so when I'm looking at some of these debates that are going on, this is why I opened it up with the idea of the straw man fallacy, which is I think sometimes people are not really either clear or they don't want to talk about what would be a core issue, but they're going to create a parallel issue because the parallel issue is it's divisive, it's powerful, it's emotional. There's truth to it, but it's not on the train track of the core element of the conversation. And so I think that's part of, and I have an ear for this, and I don't say that with vanity or pride, but because I've trained myself to think about, when I think of conflict, my first thought is, what is the core of conflict? Like a doctor, or a good doctor. I don't want to treat a symptom. I want to figure out what is the underlying issue and then move from there. And so that's why this is so powerful for us as leaders. You know, when we have conversations, I think leaders have an obligation and a responsibility to understand what is the core issue and how do we get to that core issue. And I think this has been a fantastic conversation, as it always is, because I know even if we get to the core of the issue, but we don't have, you know, Pat talked about being prepared to understand who's on the other side of the table. You know, having Baya talk about the idea of winning the heart before you try to win the mind. These are critical ideas that we've got to hang on to if we're going to be effective in helping the community get better and helping our causes advance. And so, anyway, I want to hear from some of the other women. If any of you want to unmic and share some thoughts on anything that you're hearing or anything that you're agreeing with or anything, Lydia, Catherine, Sarah, our moderator. I know you're creating a lot of space for others, Sarah, but I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
I'll share. So I know I missed a few. Sorry about that. My 7 a.m. ran over. But from what I'm hearing, I really appreciate the idea of the measure that one may use, you know, against me. I mean, the measure that they want, they're using against me, right? And so I've been fortunate in leadership where I haven't had a whole lot of these types of situations come up. But something that I'm very sensitive to is the polarization that's happening, even in the workspace. I've spent most of my career in Silicon Valley, and I feel very comfortable in diversity and inclusion for a lot of good reasons. And I think it's a beautiful experience. But in my last organization I was in, I definitely felt a positioning of perspective. And we're in medicine, so you can imagine what that can look and feel like. And I definitely believe I am a whole person and I have civil rights and all these wonderful gifts that God gives us. But there was an underlying current to it that if I didn't align, that somehow I wasn't being supportive. And I did feel that that was a bit of infraction of safety and love and my own kind of core values and even the values that the organization espoused to. So it was really great as they had different kind of groups that they were, because in the spirit of inclusion, they want to promote diversity. So they were promoting diversity for other groups, but they were also promoting inclusion for, you know, a group that I would feel comfortable with, right? So I took advantage of that because I'm like, well, the measure you're using, you have to use the same measure for everyone, right? If you're going to go down that path. But when I think about leadership specifically, and I think about some of the things that I may find myself walking into, and I have a huge heart for working with women navigating organizational complexity because I don't think there's enough teaching on that, is this idea of creating a safe space. So I love a lot of what you were speaking to and creating the norms by which we can have it. I love the idea of both can be true. You can have your opinion and I can have my opinion so long as we respect it and we don't act out in it in a way that hurts someone. We can coexist, which I feel like is an overused term, but I think the idea is a safe space of what am I really trying to create in order for you to be productive and for you to thrive. And that's a community of safety. And if I can create that, then maybe I can bring an atmosphere in my, for me, that would be an atmosphere of heaven, of inclusion and love, but not without boundary, not without a form of, there's just some things that can't be tolerated, like in any profession, right? And so it's a fine balance, but that's the heart behind of how I think about leadership and about seeking to first seek to, you know, understand, but not to forego my convictions for who I am. So if I can create that safe space, that's what I really try to strive for. And I just really appreciate the conversation because I fear that we're not allowing enough space for these conversations to happen because one opinion, if it doesn't align to Baya's point, then you're automatically ostracized and it just kind of forgoes the whole point about conversation.
Yeah, that was really well said, Lydia. And you used the word safety multiple times. I don't know if all of you, but probably some of you are aware on this call, you know, that safety is a huge buzzword right now in culture for companies. It's one of the leading words, and they talk about this is one of the prerequisites for high-performing teams, for healthy organizations, people need to feel safe. With that, and I forgot the way Lydia said it, but what came up for me was, and I don't want to twist your words, Lydia, but I think the reason why we're not having more of these conversations is there's no, in my mind, and I'm going to use the term governing body, there's nobody creating a context. I'm going to go back to when I said earlier, I wish I could have learned debating at a young age. Debating has principles and law. Debating is not, it's not yelling at each other and demeaning each other. In a debate, you are intellectually coming to a table with, these are the studies I've read. These are the thought leaders I've spoken to. These are the principles that align with these ideas. Debate is not an argument in the classic, in the context of a contemporary setting. So I go back to what you said, interesting about safety. I think leaders need to define, what does safety mean in a group, right? If I come into your home and you say, I want to have a conversation and it needs to feel safe, first thing I might do is say, can you define that? And what would happen if I very humbly disagreed with you? Is it an unsafe environment? Because for me, that's not a safety issue. That's just, I don't align with you intellectually. I mean, otherwise, we don't have any hope of having any kind of discourse. And so it's important that we even, define safety. And I'll just say this quickly as well, that Google underwent a study back in 2015. It looked at 175 of its teams, not people, 175 of its teams. It later would become known as the Aristotle Project. And they looked at what was the single greatest indicator of a team being highly impacting and highly effective. And they actually came up with safety. They literally defined it. They said these teams all believed that they can say things in this group without any kind of repercussion, any forms of judgment. No, I'll talk about, it's the last thing I want to talk about before we hang up in 10 minutes is that word judgment. So, but thank you, Lydia. Really well done. I know that Baya had her hand up and I haven't heard from Catherine or Sarah yet, but do you guys want to give us any top of mind thoughts, Catherine, Sarah, before Baya? Anything top of mind in the topic?
No, I'm enjoying the conversation. And I just want to say quickly, I'm thrilled. I have two very close friends offline, Baya and Lydia here. It's so good to have Lydia on. Love your thoughts. That's it for me.
Yeah.
I was just going to say quickly, well, I love the conversation and I love the idea of, just keeping an open mind and curiousness to understand whatever the opposing view is, and Patrick's story is a perfect example of what can come out of just being curious and what you can learn. Even if you don't end up agreeing, you can learn so much by just being curious and asking questions, and expand your own mind. But it actually, during the riots in 2020, I had a lot of friends who, I was living in New York at the time, and they were participating in the riots. And I had some of them reach out to me and actually want to have conversations like this. And it was interesting. I had some good conversations because obviously I am very much in favor of supporting the police, and they were on the opposite end. And they wanted to understand why I supported the police. And the conversation started very open and very questions and open dialogue. And then it kind of got to a point where it was not so much. And it almost got to a point where I needed to convince them, or it was starting to feel like I needed to convince them of my point of view. And they were sending me videos of police. They were sending me videos of the riots, and it was kind of getting just out of hand. And it got to a point, and this actually reminds me of the conversation we had last week with Patrick about trust. It got to the point where I just had to end the conversation, because I'm not about to try to change your beliefs, and you're definitely not going to change my beliefs. So I think we just need to agree to disagree and just move on, because now it's becoming an argument, or it could become an argument, and that's just defeating the whole purpose. So that's my 2 cents.
Well said. Well, in the future, if we want to unpack the agree to disagree, I've actually spent time on that. We won't do that today. I think it's an interesting position to take. I think it has merit, and I think it has weaknesses, and that's not a reflection of your response in any way. I've just given it its diligence, and I've had experiences with it, but I think it would be great to get the collective response of that, because I do think that does become almost a default setting when you realize this is not going to go well, and it is a gracious way to unplug from a situation that you don't want to escalate, and there's wisdom in that. So anyway, we might get back to that. Baya, do you want to do that? We got 7 minutes. You're muted.
Yeah, I know. I see I'm muted. So the first thing I wanted to say, I really want to thank you for this conversation, because we need more conversation like that. That's so important. And I wanted to address also the idea of safety. Safety is super important. It's key to any conversation that can help us grow both. But it's important to define it. If safety means I can be safe to express my opinion and your opinion, and we cannot be judged, that's fantastic. But but safety cannot be I cannot handle an intellectual conversation with someone that have a different opinion, because I am it bother me, and I'm rattled emotionally, because if you rattle emotionally because I have a different opinion than you, then it's called fragility. It's called emotional fragility. It has nothing to do with safety. And so the idea is like, how do we help you to get to a place where you can hear a different opinion? And more important than that is, how can you read more and inform yourself more, that you can realize that a lot of other people have different opinion, and that's okay. Because if you don't go in a direction like that, then we go to society that become much more indoctrination. So indoctrination is dangerous, is that you have to think like me, and everybody needs to think like that. And everybody can really become sick emotionally, mentally, and psychologically, because they have to try to fit in an environment and give up the freedom of thinking for themselves. And that's dangerous. That's all I wanted to say.
What a fantastic way to end this conversation. Paul, I'll let you have the last thoughts, and I've got one short thought. I know you got your hand up, but what you just said was so freeing and so honest and so true, Baya. And I wish I could have had those words sooner in life, but there have been many times when people were just too fragile to be in a conversation, and they would use the safety card. Even as I looked into their eyes and said, I'm not being aggressive. I have no ill will in my heart toward you. I just don't agree with what you're saying. That's not a safety issue. I am intellectually disagreeing with you. I don't want to harm you, but I don't agree with you, And I've got one thought on that, which I'll close with, and then Paul, you can have the final words here, and we can close out, because we've got 3 minutes. Is another, I came up with this list of 8 or 9 ideas about how I would approach a very, very potentially incendiary topic, which I'm watching these happen every day on these media outlets. And for me, and it comes back to something, Baya, that you introduced today, which is the idea of caring. I think what has helped me in this space, in this conversation, is distinguishing the idea of judgment from discernment, and helping people quickly understand in a conversation, if I'm judging you, that means there's something that I don't want to happen good for you. In fact, I want something bad for you to happen. I want you to suffer. And I think the way you think is lousy. I'm not saying that there's not a possibility that may exist in me, but I'm going to tell you right now on camera, that is not who I am as a person. Even people that I diametrically oppose to me, I don't want to harm them, and I want them to have the best outcome possible. And so I think in the conversation of judgment, is when I hear judgment, is you want someone to lose. which is what I don't want under any circumstances, certainly when it comes to their dignity and their soul. However, discernment is a different topic. And so judgment versus discernment, where discernment is, these are the things that I've studied over from minds that are far smarter than me for thousands of years. And these are the conclusions that I've come to. And these are the positions I hold, because that's my freedom of choice. I get to choose those things. Like you get to choose your things. I get to choose my things. And so I think that's a very safe way to keep our heart in check too, is to run it through the filter of judgment versus discernment. And when somebody accuses of judgment, you know, I think the idea of being discerning is not an illogical or a arrogant response. I think it's a wise response. I think we are to be discerning. I think that's what God's given us, that opportunity. Okay, that's my last thought, Paul, and then you got a minute and a half to wrap it up.
I can do that. I think that when you ask questions, and several of you have alluded to this, which is what triggered the thought, when you ask questions out of curiosity rather than out of judgment, you get different answers.
Yeah.
And you don't put people in a situation of confrontation because it's not necessary. You can have all of these conversations, and by asking questions out of curiosity and understanding the need to establish rapport and build trust, you have a totally different outcome. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if you guys see me looking down, I take notes on my phone. So that's what I'm doing. Great conversation. We're going to end on time. All of you, thankful. This is one of my favorite hours of the week. I get so much out of this. I hope that you guys feel the same. We'll see you. Oh, actually, next week, I'm going to be in Salt Lake City on business. And so maybe, Sarah, you can ask somebody to jump in and to coordinate next week's topic. And I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
All right, will do. Thanks, Joel. Much needed conversation for sure. Thank you.
Right.